Hey guys, so I received an interesting question on one of the videos that I made, and I wanted to make a quick video responding to it. The question comes from Nick Gandagus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. And he asks, or he says, I totally agree with everything you're saying, and at the same time, that's what puzzles me. How come you follow the philosophy of someone who was anything but self-disciplined, balanced, and true to himself? So I assume that the someone he's referring to here is Aleister Crowley. So I'm going to work on the assumption that that's who he means. So there are a few different questions in here and a few different issues, and I want to start to tease them apart. So um, probably the easiest question to answer is, was Aleister Crowley true to himself? And I say it's easy to answer because the answer is just that we really can't say. It's very hard to answer, without knowing somebody really well, whether they're being true to themselves. From what I understand from having read several Crowley biographies, he probably could have dialed it back a little bit, to be honest. I think he was probably a little bit too honest, a little too authentic sometimes. He probably could have dialed it back a little bit, but obviously that's very, very subjective. So another question that's in here is, was Crowley balanced? I think that depends largely on what you think balance means. In my opinion, balance is it's an overused term in the context of spirituality. It's a very vague term and it's a very overused term. Like, the question of balance always kind of reminds me of the first Star Wars prequel, where it's prophesied that Anakin Skywalker is going to bring about restore balance to the Force. And fast forward 2 episodes, and everyone's shocked that means that he becomes Darth Vader and kills all the Jedi. So balance is very context sensitive, and it can be quite vague if you don't specify it. Balance also happens to be a central concept in Thelema. It's probably the central concept of Thelemic magic. Generally, the way that I approach balance is that I think of balance as optimization. So you hear me use that term a lot, optimization. I use it a lot in my talks on true will and Thelemic magic. Basically, wherever Crowley says balance, I tend to say optimization, because I think, first of all, that's largely what he intended by that word. And also, I think it's far more specific than the term balance. So optimization is what happens when you have two processes going on, two opponent processes. You have basically two sets of competencies that are not aiming at the same thing, but they work together in a relationship of fittedness to bring about certain emergent properties. So the most important one in Thelema is the opponent processing, or the dual processing, between Hadit and Nuit. Hadit is the depth of yourself. Nuit is the depth of reality. The optimization of the relationship between Nuit and Hadit is the sense in which you experience the depth of yourself connecting with the depth of reality. And that is an ongoing relationship of fittedness, moment to moment, that's happening. That's not a once and for all thing. So another way to think of this is that you don't attain balance. There's no way to attain balance once and for all. It doesn't mean anything. What is actually happening is that, when you're walking on a balance beam or something, you are in the process of balancing. Or when you're standing on one foot, your foot is constantly going through very small adjustments to affect the fittedness between your body and the ground, so that you're not falling over. Balancing is a process of optimization, or a process of ongoing fittedness moment to moment. The analogy that I like to draw is with Darwinian evolution. So variation is to constraint as Hadit is to Nuit. So if you look at a lot of my recent work on that, The videos that I've done, I invoke that analogy a lot. So that's how I tend to use balance. Now, again, do you point to a person and say that person is balanced? I don't know how to answer that. Balance I see as in Crowley's sense as being a more moment to moment skill that one is constantly developing and applying. Probably in some ways he was, in other ways he wasn't. Probably, I think a similar question is being reached for when this person asks, was Crowley self-disciplined? I think that at times he clearly could be. That's really the evidence that looms large in his biographies and his autobiography, in his diaries. He could commit himself very seriously to spiritual practice for periods of time. And that's the case for me. That's the case for every spiritual practitioner I've ever known. We are not always on, so to speak. We go through periods of more or less consistent spiritual practice. It seems to me that in certain respects, Crowley did keep a spiritual discipline throughout his life. He considered his role as prophet of Thelema to be an ongoing discipline, and certainly in terms of where he put his money and where he put his time and his energy, he was very disciplined about that. That might not seem like a worthwhile pursuit to everybody, depending on how you evaluate such a role, but there's no question that he definitely applied himself to that with a certain degree of discipline. My guess is that the person leaving this comment is referring to Crowley's bouts of hedonism, particularly his drug addiction. And I do regard that as problematic. I personally do not practice a hedonistic life. I don't advocate hedonism or other self-destructive behaviors. I think that Crowley's own understanding of drug addiction was not great. I think it is largely false, in fact. However, I also believe that there are resources within Thelema to create a proper theory of addiction and of how to overcome addiction. I think this goes back again to the issue of optimization and balance. This is something that if you're curious about, I can elaborate on this. But this is a case where I take Crowley's assumptions and argue against the direction that Crowley went with them. I agree with his presuppositions. I think he should have been committed to a different position on drug addiction from the one that he had. All of this, I think, raises another question, which is not asked in this comment, but which certainly comes to my mind. Does it matter what kind of person Aleister Crowley was when we evaluate Thelema? And the answer to that is no, but also yes. So someone could make accurate observations about the human condition and how to overcome issues of foolishness and self-deception and so forth without necessarily putting that into practice in a way which is satisfactory to us or even to them. And I think that was probably the case with Crowley. He was very, so he could be very self-critical at times of the extent to which he succeeded in following his own philosophy. I also think that basic humility requires that we all accept that we are in that same position to some degree, that we are not going to be able to live up to all of our ideals, and that our beliefs and our capacity to form beliefs, it's a relatively weak capacity in relationship to changing our activities or our behavior, I should say. And what I'm saying, in other words, is that there's a difference between being able to see a problem in yourself and being able to actually put that knowledge to use and actually change your situation. And that's a perennial problem, and it gives rise to profound frustration. I think everybody knows what that's like. On the other hand, I think it's also unavoidable that Thelema carries certain existential commitments, and that we can't just simply separate holding a belief versus what kind of person we become by putting that belief into practice. What I mean by existential commitments is that it's not just simply about holding a particular belief or a certain set of ideas about the world, but that the whole point of having these ideas is that it is changing who we are, that it's bringing about a transformation in us, that it's about being or becoming a person, a certain type of person, not just about having a particular view on the world, or even about having particular kinds of experiences. This is one of the criticisms that I make of some occultism, which is loosely informed by Thelema, is that it's very much in the having mode of having cool experiences, having contact with a spirit, having, various whatever, even meditative states, or even having my true will. It's very much in the having mode, when really I think that the emphasis of Thelema was equally as much about the being mode, about being Hadith, about it being about open-ended development and open-ended growth and dynamic change, personal transformation over time. And so if we're going to bring in those dimensions, which I think we have to, then you can't separate quite as cleanly whether Crowley was at all successful or what kind of person he was by following out these ideas and these practices. I think maybe a better question to ask is, did Crowley develop wisdom? Did practicing Thelema make him wise? Will following the Thelemic spiritual path make you wise? Is it generally making people wise, or is it making them more foolish? In some respects, I think that's a far, far more difficult question to answer, but it's also a lot more important. Or to put it another way, does following this path lead to a more meaningful engagement with life? Is it meaningful? Or do we need to bring in other things from the outside to make it meaningful? That's more important to me than whether or to what extent Crowley was addicted to smack. And this kind of dovetails with my own project, with this question, which is, I would describe my project as developing the Thelemic framework and ecology of practices in the direction of a wisdom tradition. So what I tend to do when I discuss Thelema, when I teach Thelema, is I tend to speak to individuals, I tend to speak to my audience about issues of wisdom, virtue, and meaning in life, but I'm using the language of Thelema to do that, which is actually somewhat different from simply following Crowley. So that kind of gets into the first part of this question. Why do I follow this particular philosophy? To me, following Crowley would simply mean taking Thelemic ideas and practices and applying them to one's life in some way. And by that measure, I think a lot of Thelemites are following Crowley in that way. There's a very strong emphasis on that in the Thelemic community at large. My project is a little bit different. So I'm very interested in applying this stuff, and my own sort of theorizing about it that you see online is, a shadow of my own struggles of applying these ideas in a way to make my own life more meaningful and to overcome my own attempts to overcome self-delusion and foolishness. But I think the difference between what I'm doing versus following Thelema is that I tend to be focused on issues that are larger than Thelema, or that are kind of lurking behind Thelema. Questions of, again, the sense of meaning in life, but also the role of transformative mystical experiences and enlightenment in that. Also, the question of how do we systematically see through illusion and self-deception. Not seeing through illusion and self-deception in this or that particular case, but a kind of qualitative shift, a baseline shift, where suddenly a lot of problems are solved all at once. What we might call systematically overcoming foolishness, and also understanding the role that humility and tolerance play in that, and the recognition of our own limitation as mortal human beings in the context of this discourse that we have about individuals being gods or stars or what have you. and how that fits together. And of course, it's possible to approach these problems through traditions other than Thelema. My interest in Thelema has to do with the fact that, first of all, it includes ceremonial magic, which is a practice that I'm interested in. It is a very unique practice. There aren't that many comprehensive spiritual traditions that deal with magic. It's relatively rare. Usually you'll either find like a wisdom tradition, a comprehensive wisdom tradition like Buddhism, which includes meditation. And Stoicism would be another one. But that doesn't really have so much to do with magic. Magic is a big part of Buddhism. It's just not a big part of like Western Theravada inflected Buddhism, let's say. Or you have a heavy interest in ceremonial magic, but without any kind of comprehensive spiritual framework. It's just about, these vague ideas of, what works, success will be your proof, and things like, just a lot of honestly vague bullshit, as I would think of it. There's no comprehensive account of how to overcome, self-deception and illusion, and there's very little reference to meaning in life. So Thelema is unique in the sense that it brings them together. So that's part of what I'm interested in about Thelema, is that it's got a really interesting ecology of practices. Crowley's stuff on meditation I don't find as valuable, but his stuff on contemplative practice I find very interesting. In particular, ceremonial magic, which I see as a kind of interesting, unique kind of contemplative practice, let's say. And then the second reason that I'm interested in Thelema is that there's a built-in audience for it. I started to become, well, I've always been interested in these issues, and about a decade ago, I got involved with OTO and became interested in Thelema and found it compelling. And at this point, there's really just a built-in audience of people who are, I think, hungry for deeper engagement and a sense of meaning in life, and they've come to Thelema searching for it. And I do my best to show them how Thelema can be leveraged to address those concerns, and people are generally they respond very positively to that. So in a certain sense, it's a built-in kind of captive audience for me to address these issues and find other people who are interested in similar ideas, and who are also interested in ceremonial magic as an important component of that overall project of leading a more meaningful life with less foolishness and overcoming self-deception and so forth. So kind of a long-winded response. I didn't really want to leave it as a YouTube comment because it was tending on the long side, and I thought that more people might get something out of hearing the response to it. If you did, let me know. Let me know what you think of it. If you think what I'm saying is great, or if you have criticisms, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can see more of these videos as I make them. I've been having some problems with the camera and recording setup that I was using previously, so that's why I haven't been making too many videos. But so I just hopped on my webcam here to do this. So a little bit. Picture quality is not that great, but it's definitely reliable in terms of putting down some ideas and getting them out there. So let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you guys. And love is the law, love under will. Take care.